All right. Well, it looks like people are still rolling in a bit, so maybe we just give a few seconds and we can, I think, probably get a slow start by just doing some of the intro slides here and just expect that by the time we get into the meat of it, everyone will have joined. So thanks everyone for joining. We're here today. This is a public information session to talk about potential candidate lakes for support to develop watershed-based plans. So this is the first of two public information sessions. One second here. All right. Sorry about that. So our goals for the session are a few. The first is to familiarize everyone with DEP's watershed planning program, to promote understanding of watershed-based plans in general. What are watershed-based plans? Discuss and present the opportunity for watershed planning support through this project, and then finish up by giving some instructions on how to submit a statement of interest for your lake. So we'll do that by way of starting with some introductions, so we'll start with that. I'm Bob Hartzell. I'm a principal with Comprehensive Environmental, and I lead the Ecological Services practice for CEI. And with me today, representing the DEP TMDL program are Holly Brown, Matt Reardon, and Tim Fox. And they'll be here to answer questions on behalf of DEP if those come up. So additionally, we'll be talking again, as I mentioned, about what a watershed-based plan is, talking about this opportunity and what it means to be a potential candidate lake, discuss steps in the schedule for the project and for submittal of a letter of interest. And then we'll wrap up with discussion and question and answers. With regard to that, just in case you haven't used the chat function on Zoom before, what you need to do, if you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see that there's a little icon for chat, this little black box here with the speech bubble. So all you have to do is click that, and then you'll see, in most cases, for most versions of Zoom, a box will appear on the right, and you can just type any question in there. And you can type question at any time during the presentation. What we'll do, though, is we'll address those questions at the end of the presentation and just read them in order and answer them in that order. So we're going to start, pass this over to Holly Brown of MassDEP, just to give a quick overview of the DEP Watershed Planning Program.
Thanks, Bob. Hi, everyone. I'm a TMDL analyst in the Watershed Planning Program. And as Bob said, I'm just going to give a brief overview of our program. WPP's mission is to protect, enhance, and restore the quality and value of the waters of the Commonwealth. Guided by the Federal Clean Water Act, WPP implements this mission statewide through 5 sections that each have a different technical focus. Together with other MassDEP programs and state environmental agencies, WPP shares in the duty and responsibility to secure the environmental, recreational, and public health benefits of clean water for all people of the Commonwealth. Next slide. The image on the right is the water wheel and shows how the sections within the watershed planning program work together. The list on the left highlights the major roles and responsibilities of each section. First, the surface water quality section develops and implements the Massachusetts Surface Water Quality Standards. These standards are codified in our regulations and must go through an extensive public review process before they are adopted or modified. The water quality monitoring section collects surface water data that the data management and water quality assessment section then uses to assess surface water conditions. The data management and water quality assessment section has analyzed the data and determined that over 200 lakes throughout the Commonwealth are polluted. As you can see, the next step is to protect and restore water quality. The total maximum daily load section in WPP develops TMDLs restoration plans and other watershed plans to restore impaired surface waters and to protect high quality waters throughout the Commonwealth. The non-point source management section administers 2 grants designed specifically to address non-point source pollution. Again, the activities within each WPP section is guided by the Federal Clean Water Act. I'll pass it back to Bob.
All right, thanks, Holly. And as I move on here, so now we're going to be talking real briefly, just giving an overview of what a watershed-based plan is. But I've noticed that since we started, there's been quite a few people that have joined, and I would just ask that if you have not got your microphone on mute, with this many people, it helps a lot. It helps to kind of reduce some of the background noise. So just for audio quality, if you could do that for the moment, that would be appreciated. So, all right, what is a watershed-based plan? So we're going to be talking about what's called a 9-element watershed-based plan. And those 9 elements are defined by US EPA. They have guidelines on how these plans get put together. So having this 9-element watershed plan is required for water bodies like lakes to become eligible to apply for funding, federal funding that goes through MassDEP from Section 319 of the Clean Water Act. So these kind of grants are generally used for implementation work to implement actions that are identified in a watershed plan to improve water quality. So I'm just going to run down. So these 9 elements are listed by letters. So they're elements A through I. And I'm just going to give you a quick summary now. So element A is where we identify the causes and sources of pollutants that need to be controlled to achieve pollutant reductions. When we look at pollutants, we're looking at all the sources in the context of a lake in this particular image. So we'd be looking at land use based pollutants, like things like pollutants that might run off of a residential lawn or an agricultural area. Things like phosphorus, which may dry fall right out of the sky, even when it's not raining. Things that are near shore to a lake, like septic systems, which will, have inputs of pollutants that make their way into the lake by groundwater. We'll also be looking at sources that are internal to the lake. So especially in some deeper lakes, sediment can store phosphorus that gets re-released in soluble form in the late summer. So what we want to do is be able to tally up all those sources to understand where we can target opportunities to reduce those sources. So element B is once we've determined the sources and the volume of pollutants and where they're coming from, figure out what reductions we need to meet water quality goals. So the water quality goals can be set by state water quality standards, or they can be locally set goals. Like a lake association might want to meet a water quality goal that's even more stringent than the state water quality standards. So figuring out how much work needs to be done to meet those goals is element B. A part of this particular project is to understand the loading reductions needed and the relationship between the watershed and the in-lake water chemistry by using a model called the Lake Loading Response Model. So without getting into too much detail on that, which would take a while, the way it works is we build what's called an existing conditions model. So we look at all the different sources, the land use types around the watershed. We then calibrate our understanding of how those loads show themselves with in-lake water chemistry based on actual monitoring data. That's why having monitoring data is really important, especially for this project or these types of projects. And then finally, once we've done that, we've built our model, we've calibrated it based on real-world data, then we can look at this load reduction analysis. How much and where are we best going to focus efforts to meet water quality targets? Oops. So some other things that models are really useful for is they help us answer some questions that we can project into the future a bit and see how that lake and the lake watershed behave under changed conditions. So it'll help answer questions like how much pollutant load reduction is needed to meet water quality goals. That would come down to how many, for example, how many pounds of phosphorus do we need to take out of the watershed each year in order to meet a certain target in-lake water chemistry. Where should we best focus our lake watershed management funds to prevent things like algae blooms? what will a lake or a river water quality look like in 25 years? So we can take a model and then we can project what future development, future land development, subdivisions coming in, commercial developments coming in, how will those change water chemistry, even as we're making efforts in other places to improve conditions? And then other even more targeted questions like how will a lake or a river respond to climate change? Element C is when we actually then, now that we know the math on how much work we need to do to meet a water quality goal, we have to figure out what's the best way to get there. So that usually comes down to a combination of shovel in the ground type projects, things that we would consider structural, like stormwater features that could be upgraded, things like regulatory tools, strengthening local bylaws and ordinances to be better protective of water quality, and then other non-structural measures like public education and outreach. So once we've figured out what those actions are that we want to work on to achieve our water quality goal, we have to figure out what it's going to take to get those done. How much money do we need? And how much of other types of assistance do we need? So the money part of it is pretty easy to understand. It's just cash that we need to build things and do things. Technical assistance could be in the form of things like having legal counsel help to draft an improved or strengthened local ordinance. So it's basically in element E figuring out all the resources you need, both cash and other types of resources to get the job done. Element E is a required part of the plan where you need to have a public information and education component. And for lakes and river watersheds, we're typically, looking at things like helping to educate, homeowners on proper septic system maintenance, proper landscaping on their properties to reduce use of fertilizers, a variety of things that are just helpful in general to spread out and disperse how pollutant loads are reduced across the whole watershed. Element F is where we build a schedule for implementing the plan, and element G sets measurable milestones. So if we have 10 different high priority stormwater improvement projects, which ones are at the top of the list? Which ones are scheduled for year 2 after the plan is published? Which ones are scheduled for year 5? And keeping track of those to make sure you're actually achieving progress, over the long run. Element H is where we have criteria to actually measure how well we're doing at meeting our goal. And also factoring in that we may need to reevaluate what our goals are a few years in. Maybe we're exceeding our target. Maybe we're lagging behind. We need to reevaluate the targets that we're setting. And then element I is a monitoring element so that we can continue to still have good quality data to really, benchmark where we are and where we've been. So all rolled up, those are the 9 elements, A through I. And together, those go into one plan under one cover. It gets submitted to DEP for review and approval. And then at that point, once the plan is approved, it opens up the opportunity to apply for those different grant funding sources to implement. So this particular project is an opportunity where we're looking for 2 lakes to get technical support to develop a watershed plan. So to talk about the specifics, MassDEP is seeking 2 lakes that have a nutrient impairment to receive assistance on a 9-element watershed plan. Now, these plans will also serve as advanced restoration plans, or ARP. So I'm going to just take a pause here. I realize I'm getting a little bit into acronyms and alphabet soup, but just want to explain how some of these different programmatic pieces fit together. So if you're a lake association or a municipality interested in protecting a lake, what you really care about is this. You want a watershed plan that has a prioritized set of actions that you can chase after and do good things to improve water quality over the next number of years. The advanced restoration plan part of it is tied into one of DEP's requirements that they have to report to US EPA. So whenever a water body has an impairment for something like nutrients or algal blooms, once that water body has been identified as impaired, it's a requirement that the state provides EPA with a document called a total maximum daily load, or a TMDL. That's just a way of saying, what's the for the pollutant of concern, what's the maximum amount that this water body can handle before it's impaired? And it sort of sets a framework for, targeting a reduction. So in many ways, it behaves a lot like a watershed plan. It's just a more formalized way that DEP needs to report that to US EPA. This Advanced Restoration Plan term, or ARP, is a way that it basically allows these watershed plans to kind of skip over a step. So if you create a watershed plan, it will allow DEP to begin funding restoration activities before they even have this TMDL document finished and sent to EPA. I think that's about as much detail as I want to go into on this. It's more programmatic than anything else, but there is a lot of linkage between a watershed plan and the functional part of a total maximum daily load report. So let's talk about what it takes to be a good candidate lake or pond for this project. So what we want is to find 2 lakes where development of a plan is both technically feasible and has a good likelihood of leading to successful implementation and hopefully, ultimately, getting that water body delisted, to getting the impairment removed. So this whole process started back in 2024, where DEP identified nutrient impaired lakes that had impairments for this listing of criteria down here that are considered nutrient related. So algae. Algae are an impairment, but they are fueled by nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen. So it's considered a nutrient related impairment. Same thing with chlorophyll A. Chlorophyll A is a pigment produced by both rooted plants and microscopic algae. So they're an indicator of biological productivity, which is fueled by nutrients. So we can run through the same kind of linkage to all, between nutrients and all of these indicators. But that's where the starting point was for DEP. So for this particular project, for this selection of 2 lakes to get watershed planning support, these are the things you need to know. These are the boxes that you need to check for your lake. First of all, are you nutrient impaired? Do you have an impairment on the most recent list of integrated waters that the state has for either nutrients, chlorophyll A, harmful algal blooms, or low dissolved oxygen? Does your lake have public access? And that means public access by way of a boat ramp, park, a beach for the general public. So you can't be exclusive to a neighborhood, and you can't be exclusive to town residents only. It has to be access for all citizens of the Commonwealth. Third, do you have recent water quality data? So for the modeling effort, we really need data. We need to look back at data from the last 10 years, and it has to include total phosphorus data. It's great and advantageous if you also have water clarity data by way of Secchi disk measurements or chlorophyll A data. That's not required, but the main parameter here is total phosphorus. And then finally, there needs to be a committed local entity, either a lake association, municipality, regional planning agency, some local entity that's willing to partner on this project and be the leader to champion implementation efforts in future years. So getting into the project steps and schedule. Whoops. So the most important first step is, if you're interested in being considered, is to submit a statement of interest. So this is very brief, 2 pages maximum. There'll be a link to the form at the end of the presentation, so you don't need to worry about that right now. So it's pretty simple. Part A, 3 parts. Part A is just general information. What's the name of the lake? What town or towns is it in? Who's the organization that would be DEP's project partner? Who would be the person that would be the primary point of contact? Also, just list the access points that kind of document that the lake does provide general public access. Part B is the water quality data. So we just want to know who collected the data, what years and what water quality parameters are available for us to look at. Must include total phosphorus, as I mentioned earlier. And then we're asking that you provide the water quality data as an attachment. And then the last part is a little more free form, but this is a paragraph or 2 or 3, depending on how lengthy you want to get, but just a general description of what's going on. Why are you interested in developing this watershed plan? So these blue questions are not requirements, but they're just things that you might want to consider just to help flesh things out. How has water quality changed over the years? Has the lake been actively managed, for things like nuisance algal blooms or aquatic vegetation in the past 10 years? Have there been any ongoing or recent efforts to control watershed pollutants from stormwater runoff, septic systems, so on? And then finally, is there support from the community, either municipality, local lake association, et cetera, to work towards improved quality? So just give us a general feeling of what's been changing, why you're concerned about water quality, and the background of support for a watershed planning effort. So key dates, the deadline to submit that brief statement of interest is May 29th, so a little more than a month from now. And then in the following month, at some point in June, DEP will notify the selected lakes. And then we expect that development of the watershed planning process will begin in August. So pause here for a minute. This is a QR code. If you've got your smartphone with you, you can snap a photo of that, and that will link you directly to the statement of interest letter. If for any reason you have difficulty with the QR code right now, don't worry about it. We'll have contact information on the last slide for Holly Brown at DEP, and you can just shoot her an email and we can send it to you that way. But this is just an option. I'll just give a few seconds for folks to do that if they want. All right, and hopefully that was enough time. And if need be, at the end of the presentation, if anyone wants, I'm happy to go back to this and we can put that QR code up again. All right, so at this point, we'll shift over to discussion and questions and answers. So if you have a question, again, just look for that little chat box at the bottom of your screen and type your question. And I see that there's a couple already in there, so we can just start with those, I guess, while anyone else is collecting their thoughts. So the first question was, will you be making copies of slides available to participants? The answer is yes. Once the presentations are done, we will send out a PDF version of the slides to everyone who is on the email list. And the second question, if a lake's main source of nutrient impairment is internal loading, sorry, I've got to move this over. If the lake's main source of nutrient impairment is internal loading, are there management actions that can be done? And is this lake a good candidate for this opportunity? i.e., if it's not likely that the actions taken in the watershed would help much. That is a complicated question. I think before I launch into an answer, I might want to defer to the DEP folks to get more of a DEP policy answer to that. I'm happy to give color commentary on that, but Holly or Matt or Tim, anyone want to take a crack at that? I'll repeat the question. The question is, basically, if the primary source of pollutant load is internal loading, would that lake be a good candidate?
It could be a candidate, but it might not be the strongest candidate, I guess is what I'd say. Because we are looking to try to do watershed actions as well.
All right. Next question. Whoops, make sure I didn't skip one over here. Yeah. Next question is, if a municipality is in non-compliance with the MBTA Communities Act, does this affect eligibility for this opportunity?
So that answer is, I haven't heard any specific guidance about that. That's pretty much probably all I can say.
Okay. Next question is, what funding is available if a lake has clear nutrient impairment, including blooms, but is not on the 2022 or the most current list of impaired waters? Can we apply?
So I guess on that one, I would say we are limiting it to ones that are on the integrated list of water for nutrient impairment. I would suggest reaching out to our 604B water quality planning section and also our assessment group in terms of if you do have data showing an impairment, and it's quality assured data, that could be used to get a water body on the integrated list of waters. But you could also potentially do a water quality management grant, which is the 604B grant program.
All right, next question. Would a lake with an invasive weed issue be a good candidate? And I think I can answer that one just based on Matt's previous answer. So if a lake only has impairments related to non-native invasive plants, it wouldn't currently be a good candidate. If it has invasive plants and other nutrient-related impairments, then it could be. Did I capture that about right, Matt?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Next question, will these funds be available to towns currently prevented from getting grants due to the MBTA housing bill? So that was already answered as being sort of inconclusive. There's currently no current guidance on that. Do you think, Matt or others at DP, when we send out the email with the slides as follow-up, is that something that could potentially be clarified by then, or is that just still likely to be a pending uncertainty?
No one has told me that that's an issue for our project.
Okay.
So that's all I can say. It's really literally all I can say.
Okay. Next, is there a preferred size of pond or lake? Can it be an impoundment? I think in general, there is no size criteria. And yes, there are a lot of water bodies in Massachusetts that are either impoundments or partially impounded, maybe a natural water body that was enhanced in its storage and size. So other than the criteria that were listed earlier, nutrient-related impairment, public access, having water quality data from the last 10 years, and having a local champion, those are the main criteria. If you check all those 4 boxes, you would be a reasonable candidate. Next question. Where do we find the list of impaired lakes? So that official listing, which is the 2022 being the most recently published year, that Massachusetts list of integrated list of waters, you'll find a link to that in the letter of interest form that the QR code provided. So if you click that, it's kind of a long report, but what you can do with any document like that, if you hit Control F and then search for your water body's name, if you will find a list of all the things that water body is impaired for. So if there's any questions about that, if you look at that report and you're still confused about it, you're not 100% sure, you can send me an email, or you can send Holly an email by way of the last slide that's available, and we can answer that for you if you need. What appears to be the last question is, can you tell us about example lakes that have risen to the top in this sort of opportunity in the past? Or perhaps give characteristics of an imaginary lake that you'd think would be a good candidate. You want me to take a crack at that, DEP folks?
Sure. Okay,
so I'm going to answer this cautiously because I don't want to discourage anyone from applying. We don't know at this point how many or which lakes will be applying for this opportunity, but I would say in general, a good candidate lake would be, well, let's start with the data. If we don't have, solid water quality, the better the water quality data, the more robust, the more data points we have, the better job we can do with our modeling effort. So if you have 2 years of data with just a couple of data points from the middle of the lake, that would pass muster for submitting, but it's not going to be as advantageous as if you had like multiple years with multiple data points over the course of the growing season. You know, if you had June, July, August data for 5 years, that's great, you know. So, or even more than that, you know. So the more data, the better. That will be helpful. In general, if you have an enormous watershed to lake ratio, meaning you've got 100 acres of land for every acre of surface water of your lake or pond, um, generally speaking, from a watershed management perspective, smaller watershed to lake ratio is more manageable. I wouldn't say that that's a discounting factor, though. It's just something that we'll be looking at. Um, I don't know that I'd really say a whole lot more than that. I think what we want to do is just see who applies, look at the data, and make a technical decision on, you know, the best candidates from there. I see that anyone who's looking at the chat, Matt has provided both that list of the integrated list of waters, so you can click that link to see which impairments your lake or pond has. And then there's also an interactive viewer that can link you to the same data by clicking on a map, just clicking on your lake on that map. So that covers all the questions that people have. Well, we have one new one that just popped in. Says, I'm a layperson, but wondering what type amount of funding is available. Matt or Holly?
Well, there was another previous question about the prognosis for 319. I mean, I would say that they have funding this spring for both 604B and 319. And I believe that the 604B grant is pretty significant. It's like $1 million opportunity coming up, I believe. So, you know, as long as that keeps getting funded by the federal government, the 319, we'll keep obviously having grant rounds. And so, but that's not the only opportunity. We also have our municipal vulnerability program grants can be used as well. So there is opportunities out there.
All right, a few new questions have come in. Do you want all monitoring data or just nutrient, SECI, et cetera? For example, dissolved oxygen, specific conductance, pH. I would say for the modeling effort, the most important parameters are total phosphorus, chlorophyll A, SECI disk. However, dissolved oxygen is a close runner-up. And I would say if you've got your data in some sort of a spreadsheet form where it's got a whole bunch of parameters, I wouldn't worry about parsing it out. Just send us everything and we'll do the parsing. And we want to make this really easy for folks to submit on. So I don't want you to have to spend time creating a whole new spreadsheet with, you know, columns and rows deleted. I would just say send it all in whatever format makes it easiest to send it, and we'll figure out which pieces of it are the most relevant to what we're doing here. Next question said, you haven't addressed funding going forward. So I think Matt answered that as best as it's possible to answer that now. And then next question, is the funding typically used to hire a consultant to work up the 9-point plan? In the context of this project, the answer is yes. And as far as typically goes, I think that's also generally yes. Although there are plans that are put together, you know, for example, there are some that we've worked on, like that I've worked on with regional planning commissions, where commission staff will do a pretty good chunk of the work and maybe hire an engineering or science consultant for portions of the plan. So there's not, you know, in the big picture, there's more than one right way to do it. For this particular effort, though, CEI will be the consultant developing the plans for the two selected lakes. So that's well, we have a new one. Every time I think we have no more questions, there's new ones that pop up. Question is, do you want the actual data rather than description of the data set? Yeah, we do want the actual data. If you've got something in narrative that already exists that provides some context to that, I would say certainly send it along if it's not hard to do. But the actual numbers are really what we want to see. Next question, is there a minimum size of the lake or pond? DEP folks, tell me if you have an opinion on this, but no, there is no size criteria that's been stated.
No.
All right, well, we've got 25 minutes, 24 minutes yet on the scheduled meeting time. So we will sit here and answer questions for as long as anyone wants. And I'll just keep an eye on the questions as they roll in. But maybe in the interim, while we're seeing if any other questions come in, I'm going to go to that contact slide. So you can write down Holly's email just in case you need to have that QR code or you want the letter of interest form sent to you directly, or if any other questions come up, between now and May 29th.
So Bob, there was a question on the process for getting listed for nutrient impairment. And I would say, so usually what happens is many people that are collecting data will reach out to our assessment group. There's a guy, Robert Smith, who kind of is in charge of reviewing external data from groups. And let me see if I can find that webpage as well. And so basically they'll ask you, like, do you have a quality assurance plan, and they'll ask you about, they'll look at your data and then they'll review the data and see if it's good enough for their uses in terms of assessing water quality as part of the integrated list of waters. And assuming yes, they will use that data to make an assessment. And they usually have an open period before each integrated list where they put out a request for data, but you could also just reach out to them whenever and try to get in the queue for that if that's what you want to do. And then that'll be in it. So the next list is in 2028. And so that you would want to push on them to kind of get that information and that assessment done for that list.
All right, we have another question here saying, would you walk through again how to find if your pond is on the list? So, all right, so assuming that you have that link that Matt provided to that integrated list of waters. So you open that up as a PDF and then hit Control F. That's the search function within any PDF document. It works for Word documents too. So let's just say, the name of your lake is Crystal Lake. You just hit Control F, you type in Crystal Lake, and then that will let you see all the places in the document where that water body name is listed. So the document itself is structured and there's a bunch of different categories. So what you're looking for is your lake listed under category 5? That means the lake has an impairment and it requires a total maximum daily load document, or the TMDL. So if you were to flip through that document from front to back, it would start with category 2, then go category 3. Category 4 would be an impaired water body, but a TMDL has already been developed. In this case, we're looking for water bodies that are in category 5, meaning they're impaired, but a TMDL has not yet been developed. And then you'll see I think it's like 3/4 of the way over to the right. It'll list all the impairments, like total phosphorus or dissolved oxygen, chlorophyll A.
But Bob, do you want to just run through it? If Anne wants to put her lake in there, you want to just run through it right now?
Just actually do the search.
Yeah.
Sure. I can do that. Let me open that up, and then I can share screen on that. So I'm going to stop sharing it for the moment. All right. All right, just let me know when you can see that first page of the document.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm just here on the front page. I'm just hitting now Control F. Oops, I gotta click it. So as soon as I did that, you see this little search box pop up. So what's the name of the water body that we're looking for?
Winter Pond in Winchester.
Okay, so I'm just going to type in Winter Pond and then hit return or enter. So it's searching right now. So we'll just let it finish looking. We've got at least one hit. Well, okay, that's it. So right here, I can tell just by going to the top of the page, we're in category 5. So that's the category we're looking for. This category 5 is waters requiring a TMDL. A water would not require a TMDL if it didn't have an impairment. One of these impairments listed here on the second to the last column. So in the case of Winter Pond, keep in mind that depending on the name of your lake and pond, there may be multiple in the state. So things like Silver Lake, I think there's like 40 Silver Lakes. There's, or Mill Pond, there's a lot of those too. So you need to look at the name and then make sure it's in the right town at least. So in this case, we know it's Winter Pond. We're confirming that it's in Winchester. And then over here, we see that it's impaired for non-native invasive, non-native aquatic plants. And that would not qualify. But down here, the second one, nutrient eutrophication biological indicators, that does. So that is a nutrient-related impairment. So you check that box. That's basically it. You just do a search function, and if there were 5 hits up here for Winter Pond, we could look at the first one and then just click the little right arrow and it would take you to the next one until you've looked at all of them. All right, I'm going to stop share on that. Hopefully that was clear enough. All right. So there's a question saying that is not the document that came up in the link. I would suggest try it again because I got to the link the document that we were just looking at, I got there by clicking on the link that Matt provided. So it appears that that's the right link and it appears to be functioning. I'm not sure. I think Matt did provide 2 links. So the top one takes you to the document that we were just on. And the second one is for the water quality data viewer. So it's possible maybe you hit the second one and not the first.
I gave the link to the overall 2022 landing page, and then the first link is the integrated list. But then there's a bunch of appendices as well.
Yeah,
so maybe that's the confusion.
Yep.
I apologize if that's the case, but I wanted everyone to have everything just in case there was a specific appendix for their watershed that they might be interested in.
No, thanks for clarifying that, Matt. I've been to that page so many times now that my brain just skipped over that step.
Yep.
Um, all right, next question. What are criteria for dissolved oxygen impairment? E.g., if the surface layer of the lake typically has greater than 8 milligrams per liter of dissolved oxygen, but at 15 feet it is 2 milligrams per liter, and near the bottom anoxic, is this impaired? Is the goal that DO be greater than a certain amount throughout the water column all year, no matter how deep? Boy, that is a loaded question. So for most water bodies in the state, with the exception of some cold water fisheries, um, the dissolved oxygen criteria is 5 milligrams per liter. However, there is a clause within the water quality standard that says, so basically the water quality standard says you have to be at that level, 5 milligrams per liter or higher. And then it finishes up by saying, in quotes, unless naturally occurring. That naturally occurring condition is not defined anywhere in the water quality standards. So it leaves some discretion. And the exact process used by DEP on specific lakes when looking at DO data, there is some professional judgment that goes into that. Um, the dissolved oxygen criteria are probably the most confusing because it's not a bright line numeric standard and it has that wiggle room at the end. But correct me if I'm wrong, Matt. My general take is that EPA errs on the side of conservatism, meaning it's not giving too many water bodies a pass if they have lower DO than the standard. It's erring on being conservative, saying that if the numbers are lower, you would list it for that impairment rather than just saying, yeah, it's probably good enough. Am I accurately representing that?
Um, well, what our assessment group has done in the past, that naturally occurring is usually pretty difficult to meet. You'd have to be pretty much forested lake, maybe in a state park, I would probably guess. They have a whole appendix in their listing methodology about how they consider things natural. But historically, what they've done for the DO is that they look at either the volume of low oxygen water, what Karen's asking about, or they look at kind of the surface area of where that low oxygen water is, like how much of the lake that represents. And then they use that to assess whether or not a lake is considered impaired for dissolved oxygen. I mean, there are lakes in Maine that are very deep, that are pretty pristine, that have low oxygen, so. It can happen.
So I feel like these are all really great discussion points. I feel like the questions have been very, like, really good and helps to kind of flesh out some of the issues that around, some of the complexities around, these impairments. But I would encourage folks, if you've got water quality data that we can look at and you meet the other criteria, I'm guessing you probably wouldn't, you know, be listening in, or too many people wouldn't be listening in if you didn't have a local group that was interested and that would be a good partner for the project. So if you've got public access and you've got data, I would say, I would encourage everyone to just submit. You never know how these things will play out. And I wouldn't, just because you may have gotten an answer in this discussion, that wouldn't mean that you're the perfect lake. Um, I wouldn't discourage you from submitting. It's one of the reasons why we wanted the submittal process to be really easy. It shouldn't take, I hope it wouldn't take anyone more than an hour. If you've got data, just take it in whatever format you have. Spend a few minutes just listing who you are, where the lake is, and a very brief summary of what's going on. But hopefully that shouldn't take more than an hour. And if it is taking more than an hour, you're probably overkilling it a little bit. We do have a new question. Is a lake with impairment by virtue of DO, but with generally okay total phosphorus values, likely to be a good candidate? I think that actually is that's a good question. That's a counterpoint to the comments I just made. If you generally have okay phosphorus values, I mean, there's still an impairment. This is how I look at it. In a big lake that's got dissolved oxygen issues in the deeper waters, if you improve the watershed conditions, even if your total phosphorus levels are pretty good, if you drive those phosphorus levels down from the watershed, or frankly from any source, over time, when the lake continues to flush, and get new water comes in and it gets replaced, and that cycle happens year after year after year. If you've reduced the external phosphorus load, the internal loading will eventually follow. It likely will take a number of years. It can take even decades. But if you reduce the watershed sources from the external watershed, or the pollutant sources from the external watershed, the internal loading will naturally respond. Then that internal load that's just sitting there, hunkered down in the bottom sediments, is going to get relatively depleted over time, and there will be less of it seasonally resuspending. That's just how the math works out. So it's never a bad idea to take actions in the watershed that reduce external load. And new question, are you actually going to analyze some of the data in order to select the two lakes? The answer is definitely yes. The next question is a statement, which is cool. So we'll take it. All right, well, we're getting down into single-digit minutes here, so don't feel shy about asking any question that might come to mind. If you're on the fence about asking, I would say just throw it out there. And we got a few minutes left, so I want to make sure everyone's leaving this meeting feeling like they're in a good place and they understand what we're looking for. All right, well, I'm just going to, in case anyone wants to be able to just grab it more easily, just in case you didn't get Holly's email address, I just put it into the chat. I'm going to add my own just in case that's helpful for any reason along the way.
We had a comment from David and from Karen, a question.
Yes. So Dave's question, a sidebar question, when is a watershed-based plan full? It seems like that work never ends. That's a great observation, and it's something I actually wished I had pointed out when I was running through the summary of the plan. One of the bits at the end of every plan that's required is something called adaptive management. So what it's saying is that this is not a plan that you write once and it solves your problems and you never look at it again, or you never need to do anything else. What it means is that you have to commit to some period of time. Usually it's like 5 years after the plan is published, where you go back and you evaluate how you're doing, the progress you're making towards meeting your goals, what the data is telling you. Did you set your water quality targets in the right place? Maybe you need to adjust your thinking because you have 5 more years of data and now your understanding of the lake's chemistry is different. So the adaptive management part of it means exactly what Dave just said. It is a never-ending question. It's kind of like having a commitment to your personal health and well-being. Just because you did a good job with, having a healthy diet and exercise in 2026 doesn't mean you did it and you're done for the rest of your life. It's more of like a commitment to constantly working on these things. And it's not just for your lifetime, it's generationally, like it goes on to your kids and your grandkids, and it never ever ends. But sometimes you can make step changes in the way that, you start thinking about the watershed and addressing stormwater and thinking about septic systems and all these things. So I think it's a fair point, though, that, whatever work and improvements you make now, in some cases, depending on the watershed, you may be really trying to just tread water as land development continues. So you're needing to do this work sometimes just to stay in the same place. Sometimes you can actually really move the dial and make things better. It all depends on the specifics of your lake and the watershed and the features inside of it. The next question was, how heavily do you weigh quantity and quality of data to decide on the two lakes? Boy, that's a tough one because until we have the submittals, it's hard to know. The quality and quantity will be relative to the submittals that we get. Um, you know, data quality. Go ahead, Matt.
Wasn't me.
Oh, okay. I thought you said something. I think both are important. We're gonna have to have some understanding that the data was collected in a way that it's, good quality data. It's not junk. Somebody was, following some sort of protocol, using reliable equipment and so on. Quantity is important though, as I mentioned. If we have one data point from the middle of the lake each summer, that's going to give us less robust, less statistically valid data to plug into our model than if we had multiple points of data each summer for the past 10 years. There's a sliding scale though. Like I said, it's all going to be relative to the submittals that we get. I've done modeling for lakes that had, deep hole data, but nothing from their major tributary. And you can still make it work. It's just, the error bar on your model becomes larger. You want to have as few big variables as possible. You're always fighting with the variable of internal load. Almost never do you have perfect data set to, dial in directly on internal loads. So there's a little bit of plus and minus on that. So the best combination is in-lake data, preferably from the deep spot, decent amount of tributary data right at the point where it enters the lake. Sometimes you have one big tributary, sometimes you have multiples. We're going to have to just look at what gets submitted and, try to find the best match. The only thing I can tell you for sure is we never have a perfect data set. There's no such thing. You always do the best you can with the data you have, and then some of that additional data collection becomes a recommendation for the out years, following completion of the plan. You don't want to always come back to the idea that you don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good enough. And sometimes the data you have is good enough to have a solid plan, and you just acknowledge openly in the report where there's some data needs or some opportunities to improve on that moving forward. Next question. So if a lake is 80% of the way to a watershed-based plan, could this funding help to get you to 120%? I think the answer is yes. I will defer to DEP's opinion on that. I don't, somebody's opinion about what 80% looks like might be somebody else's opinion of 50%. So I really don't know exactly what what 80% means in this context. But if you don't have a published 9-element plan, I think that you would be a candidate, regardless of if you have a lot of the stuff to get you there. Another question, if recent if recent tributary data are absent, is this a big impediment to selection? I wouldn't say it's necessarily an impediment. I mention it because it's always helpful. It's also really not super unusual to have good in-lake data, but not great tributary data. That's a common gap when we do plans. It just means that we'd have to be more reliant on modeling estimates of what's coming in from a given tributary, and then calibrate, and turn the dials on the model to have a better understanding of how things are working instead of having field data to help dial us in. All right, well, we're at 3:02. I'm happy to stick around a bit if folks have more questions. DEP folks, I don't know what your schedule is looking like, but
Yeah, we can wait for a couple more questions, or we can end it up. So Bob, just logistics. We're going to have another virtual meeting tomorrow night,
right.
and then we're going to email everyone who attended the PowerPoint, and we'll also send them the letter of interest as well.
That's right. Yep.
Yep.
Those will go out, and both of those things will go out in the email to everyone that was on the original email list.
And you're going to provide a link to the recording.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Here you go. Great. Okay, I think going once, going twice, 3 times, 303. We appreciate everyone coming and attending, and we hope we get a lot of submittals. And we hope we can help you out.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. Great questions.
Thank you. Great session.